Wow, thank you for braving this weather to join us this evening. Go figure that it's raining in Washington, right? Well, good evening. My name is Chris Brown, and I'm the Deputy Director here at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to the first of this this fall's General Electric Aviation Series. The GE Aviation Lecture Series is the museum's longest-running sponsored program. We've hosted more than 150 of them since 1982, with speakers ranging from legendary aviators like Chuck Yeager and Bob Hoover to pilots pushing the modern aviation envelope like Thunderbird pilot Nicole Malachowski and Boeing test pilot Susanna Darcy Henneman. I've spent my whole career in aviation in one way or another. Before joining the museum, I spent time as the airport manager at both Dulles Airport and Reagan National Airport. And before that, I flew F-14s with the US Navy. So the GE Aviation Lecture Series is always of particular interest to me. It's a chance to meet inspiring pilots and hear about innovations in the aviation industry. Thanks to the support of GE Aviation, we've been able to provide access to these programs free of charge, both for those of you attending in person and more recently, all over the world via our live webcast and social media. Representing GE Aviation in the audience tonight is Amelia Butler, Federal Marketing Leader at GE Aviation. Please join me in thanking Amelia and the entire GE Aviation team. Sorry, the lights, I know you're here, Amelia, somewhere. There you are, I'm sorry. My apologies. With help from our partners like GE Aviation, we will be ready to inspire the new generations of visitors for decades to come. And this support will be more important than ever as we embark on the most ambitious project since the construction of the Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center, this being a transformation of our home here on the National Mall from the inside out. Later this year, our renovation will start as we update or reimagine each of our 23 galleries. But don't worry, we will remain open throughout the whole process. The new National Air and Space Museum will tell transformative stories of flight in new ways to new audiences, allowing us to reach further than ever before. This lecture series celebrates trailblazing aviators that set new milestones. Tonight's speaker represents the future of aviation and the importance of inspiring the next generation of innovators and explorers. She's had a busy year, but has always made time to talk to the next generation about her triumphs, challenges, and experiences. Shaesta Waiz is the first female certified civilian pilot from Afghanistan, and last year became the youngest woman to circumnavigate the globe solo in a single-engine airplane. That is an impressive accomplishment in and of itself. But what sets Shaesta apart is the motivation for her around-the-world flight. She has a passion for global outreach to youth in underprivileged socioeconomic environments and in regions of the world unsupportive of women. So when she decided to accept the challenge to fly around the world, she knew she wanted to do it for something bigger than herself. During her 5-month flight, which took her to 5 continents and 22 countries, she met with over 3,000 children and young adults. In each country she visited, she engaged, empowered, and motivated youth, especially young girls, to explore STEM-related fields and aviation education. Her dedication to that mission was evident before she even took off on her round-the-world flight. While studying at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, Shaesta founded the Women's Ambassador Program to mentor and support young women pursuing an education in aviation and engineering. She is also the founder of the nonprofit organization Dreams Soar, which promotes STEM education through aviation. In recognition of Shaesta's accomplishments and dedication to inspiring the next generation, She was awarded the National Air and Space Museum Trophy for Current Achievement earlier this year. It is now my personal and profound pleasure to introduce Ms. Shaesta Waiz.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I appreciate you all making the time to come out here in rainy DC. As it was mentioned by Chris in the introduction, I was in this exact theater earlier this year accepting an incredible honor, the National Air and Space Museum Current Achievement Award, which this was an award that I had heard about when I just got into aviation. And I remember reading about the pilots and the people who were awarded this award, and I thought, wow, how cool. The day that I was here accepting this award, I kept pinching myself, thinking, I can't believe I'm here under these circumstances. Before I get into the journey around the world, I want to take just 5 minutes to share this incredible video that the National Air and Space Museum put together. And what's so cool about this video is that it gives you some insights to why I'm here, why the committee selected me as the Current Achievement Award winner. So if I can have your attention for 5 quick minutes, then after this video, we will get into the flight around the world and the journey that took place just last year. When it came time to really define what I wanted to do in aviation, I felt like I had a sense of duty to give back because I was so fortunate knowing there are girls my age in Afghanistan that are living in a country that's at war. If I'm going to fly around the world, I want to do it for a reason, and that is to promote STEM education to the next generation because it's important, it's exciting. These are careers where the amount of women in the STEM fields is just staggeringly low. If only people could experience aviation through my eyes. When I'm up in the air, I'm a whole different person. That's something that's so magical that I want to share with every woman out there, that these careers exist, that aviation is a possibility. The idea of flying around the world really started about 4 or 5 years ago. And at first, it was a challenge. And I quickly realized that I can't do it all. This is going to be an amazing adventure, and I want to incorporate and include as many people on this journey as possible.
We have an organization within an organization, if you will, called the Dream Team. It's a group of young people who are extremely dedicated to our mission of inspiring the next generation and helping to show that even as a student, you can get involved in something big.
It was a full year after I had got on the team that she was getting ready to launch. And it was such a relief because it was just so much anticipation building up. We had to move the launch date a few times due to weather and just, for her safety.
By the time we got to the flight in May, everyone was just, we're ready to do this, let's do this.
I visited a total of 30 stops, 22 different countries across 5 continents, just shy of 25,000 nautical miles in a Beechcraft Bonanza. I started off this trip thinking I'm gonna give it my best shot, but seeing the outcome with the kids after they would see the videos, hear me talk, see the airplane, I could tell it was life-changing.
I kind of think it's almost a little bit of an enlightenment for the very first time in their lives. Little girls and boys see, oh, look at this amazing airplane. It's so powerful. This woman flying it is so powerful. What's different from her than me? And it forces people to question that difference and realize there is none. And then those walls, those limits crumble.
The stories were incredible. I cried every photograph they sent me. I was bawling.
It was such a unique around the world flight. People fly around the world all the time, but they don't necessarily try to do the outreach events or try to do it on social media the way we did it.
And if I didn't have this component of outreach in STEM with the next generation, I think I probably would have abandoned the airplane in Halifax and said, you know what, I don't want to fly around the world.
Her landing here will make her officially the youngest woman to circumnavigate the world in a single-engine aircraft.
I do think Dreams Soar is, showing the world that the face of STEM and aviation is definitely changing.
Our next stage is to really empower people, give scholarships, like open doors.
Sally Ride once said, you can't be what you can't see. If more people like Shaesta can get out there and spread the word, and again, be that role model, because we really want to let young girls know that their dreams can soar, I just think it'll do nothing but help over time.
All right, thank you. So my story started back in 1987 when my family left Afghanistan as refugees and settled in a city called Richmond, California. I was barely a year old. My family included my mom, my father, my grandparents, my older sister, and two of my uncles and an aunt. We were very fortunate to come to the United States because the peak of the Afghan-Soviet War was upon us at that time, 31 years ago. And my family realized that it wasn't going to get any safer, that it was dangerous, and it was time for them to go to America to seek refuge. Growing up, I grew up in Richmond, California. If you know anything about Richmond, the crime rate is pretty high. I went to an elementary school for underprivileged students. Growing up, English was not my first language. At home, my parents spoke Farsi and Pashto because they didn't know the English language, nor did they know much about the American culture. So growing up, it was very traditional. We ate food with our hands on a mat on the floor. My mom cooked traditional Afghani food, which was very delicious, but every day I would crave for McDonald's because that was something we just couldn't eat. It was a luxury. And growing up, one of my biggest challenges really was the fact that I was extremely shy. I was so shy that in class, I couldn't raise my hand to say one word, present or here, during attendance. Public speaking was very difficult for me. I grew up with 5 sisters, so 6 girls, and I also was not the brightest student in class. I struggled a lot. Again, English was my 3rd language. But the subjects that I struggled in the most were science, technology, engineering, mathematics. I mean, these were subjects that when we would have homework assignments, I would just not turn it in because I thought, I don't know what I'm doing or why I need to learn these things because in my mind, I thought I was going to get married at a young age and have a family and be a housewife like my mother and my grandmother and generations before them. And although there's nothing wrong with being a housewife, you know, I feel like my sisters and I, we just didn't know about the opportunities that America was providing us, especially the educational opportunities. We just didn't know. So again, I grew up thinking the best thing that life could offer me is for me to grow up, become a housewife, and you know, have a big family. Well, all of that changed for me at the age of 17. At 17, I had the opportunity to fly on a commercial airplane. I flew on Delta Airlines. I believe it was a Boeing 757 traveling from California to Florida. Now, growing up, my parents had 6 kids, and we couldn't afford air travel. So anytime we would travel, we would all kind of load up in a minivan and go to our destination. But at 17, I had the chance to get into an airplane and to sit as a passenger and to fly across the United States. Growing up, my only exposure to aviation were aircraft accidents on television. I didn't live nearby an airport. Nobody in my family was involved in aviation. I didn't have any friends whose parents were pilots. So the only exposure, anytime I would see an airplane, it would typically be on the news when there would be an unfortunate aircraft accident. So I thought airplanes were extremely scary and that they would naturally just fall out of the sky. So there I was, 17 years old, not knowing what a gate was or a terminal, completely lost, making my way to my gate, eventually into the airplane, buckling my seatbelt and just taking a deep breath. I thought, my God, this plane is probably gonna launch into the sky like a rocket. And it's gonna be this big roller coaster effect from California to Florida. I mean, I really didn't know what was gonna happen. And as soon as the engine started and we started to slowly taxi onto the runway, something happened. And it happened when the aircraft started taxiing, and eventually the airplane started to accelerate and take off. I have to say, Delta Airlines did an incredible job of pilots because it was the most beautiful takeoff I could ever imagine. It was very gentle. It was also very romantic. Being in the airplane, looking out the window, seeing this airplane gently lift off, and then slowly elevating into the sky. And that was the first time that I was ever elevated. I had never flown before, and I didn't have the opportunity to go on roller coasters as a kid. So again, I was being elevated, flying into the sky, and I remember looking out the window and seeing Richmond, California, my world, a city that I had grown up in. Richmond was everything to me. And sitting in that seat, looking out the window, my perspective changed. I realized how small Richmond is and how big the world is. And every nautical mile that was flown towards Florida, I started to fall in love with aviation. I remember sitting in my seat thinking, how is it that this plane is flying? How is it that this piece of metal can carry 200 people? I was curious. Needless to say, when I landed in Florida, there's a lot of attractions in Florida. There's Disney World, there's the famous beaches. And although all of those options were really tempting, I didn't want to leave the airport. I wanted to stay at the airport and learn how to become a pilot. And from there, I went back to California eventually. I spoke to my high school counselor, and he told me about a university called Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. When I looked at the cost of flight training, I thought there's no way I can afford to fly. There goes my dreams. And then, I heard about scholarships and financial aid. So I enrolled at a community college for 2 years. I took my first calculus class, my first physics class, and I have to say, I was one of the best students in my Calc 2 class, because every problem that I had in front of me, whether it was a physics problem or a calculus problem, or even reading a book, I would always think, okay, imagine that this is a pilot flying from point A to point B, or this is a equation that I have to figure out to get into the plane and fly. I applied something that I loved, aviation, to every problem that came my way, regardless of what subject it was. And that's what kept me motivated through my associate's degree. I eventually did get into Embry-Riddle. I got my bachelor's degree from Embry-Riddle in the Daytona Beach campus, and eventually went on to further my education, and I got a master's degree. Now, if you would have told 7-year-old me, who was extremely shy and not the brightest student, that one day I would go on to become a pilot, getting a bachelor's and then a master's degree, I would have never believed you. But that's what passion can do. That's what finding your dreams can do to someone, is it can motivate them and make them completely change their life around. Now, people often ask, how do you go from being this shy 7-year-old girl who could barely speak English to flying around the world by yourself in a small airplane? And my answer to that question is that when I'm up in the airplane, it doesn't matter who I am. It doesn't matter if I'm a girl, a boy, from Afghanistan, from Jamaica, if I have black hair, blue hair, if I have yellow skin, purple skin, none of those things matter when you're in an airplane. When I'm in the cockpit of an aircraft, the only thing that matters is my ability to fly that aircraft, nothing else. Not my background, not where I come from, not financially where I am in life. Again, all of those things are very irrelevant once that engine starts. And the only thing that matters is, again, my ability to fly that plane. And being in this unbiased environment is really what transformed me to become a confident woman, a woman to believe in her abilities, and a woman who eventually flew around the world. This is a picture that I took while flying. And this is my office, basically, the view from the office. And every time I go up in the air, I come back down that much more confident and that much more passionate about aviation. And I really think for me what did it was being in this very unbiased environment that allowed me to put my guard down and for me to really immerse myself into flying. When it came down to finding, what do I want to do with my career? Do I want to become an airline pilot? Do I want to fly for the military? Do I want to fly corporate jets for businesses? I couldn't find an answer. And I sat down one day and I thought, okay, if I could do anything with aviation, what would that be? And I kept coming back to this idea of, I love to fly. I would love to fly in an airplane, go around the world, and bring the idea that science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM, and aviation is a possibility for kids around the world, specifically girls, especially with girls that come from a different background like mine. And that job opportunity didn't exist. There aren't pilots out there who fly around the world for a living. And I thought, if it doesn't exist, I need to create it. So I started a nonprofit organization called Dreams Soar Incorporated. We're an all-volunteer, small nonprofit based out of Florida. We all work virtual, but our home base is in Florida. And as I started to progress with this dream, this idea of flying around the world, I saw that there were a lot of people interested in helping me out. And eventually, I thought, you know what? This group of people who are willing to help me, they really serve as an advisory council. These close professors and teachers and people in the industry, these people really can serve as a board of directors. And then I had my friends from college, college students, both in the graduate and undergraduate program that I thought, you know what, they could serve as what we call the dream team. And naturally, Dreams Soar developed, where we had a very seasoned board of directors, we had our advisory council, and our working team, which was a dream team, which were college students. And as this team of 40 volunteers came together, this idea of flying around the world became that much more of a reality. It became more of a reality when we acquired the aircraft for this mission of flying around the world. The plane that you see on the screen is a Beechcraft Bonanza. It's an A-36. The year that this aircraft was built was 2001. It wasn't the latest and greatest plane, but it got the job done. It has a single-engine Continental IO 550, and one engine. Sometimes people might feel nervous, especially going over the ocean. But this engine, I had a lot of faith in it. I was very familiar with it, and this is the engine that I essentially trusted my life with to get across these oceans and remote parts of the world. Inside the plane was really cozy, so my co-pilot was a 59-gallon fuel tank that sat right next to me. And then the passenger seats were removed, and there was a 150-gallon tank that sat in the back. And this was my home for 145 days as I went around the world. It was very cozy, I have to say. And directly behind my seat, I had a life raft. So the pilot's seat couldn't incline back, so I had a back brace to make sure that there was some support for my back. You can see kind of a bag of chips, oxygen. You know, I kind of had the survival equipment right behind me, easily accessible in the event if something were to happen. Once we had the aircraft put together, we had the team, the route came together. You know, I was ready to take off, to fly around the world. And on May 13th of just last year, 2017, I departed from Daytona Beach International Airport to fly solo around the world. And this was my departure. So I took off from Daytona Beach, headed to Columbus, Ohio. And the reason why I selected Columbus, Ohio, because the woman that you see photographed in this picture, this woman right here, this is Jerry Mock. And Jerry Mock was the first woman who ever flew solo around the world back in 1964. Amelia Earhart attempted it, but unfortunately she wasn't successful. And who eventually set that record is Jerry Mock, a housewife from Columbus, Ohio, who flew around the world in a Cessna 180. And she did so, she went around the world all in a dress, which I thought was really impressive because it's really hard to do. But she was very classy like that. And I went to Columbus to honor Jerry because before Jerry Mock passed away, I had the opportunity to meet with her. And when I told her about my plans of flying around the world, she looked me in the eye and she said, "You're going to do this. I know that you are. You have that spirit about you that I had back in 1964. And when you fly around the world and you make your stops, I want you to collect a postcard for me." And to be a young, impressionable young girl, kind of unsure if she wants to fly around the world, hearing Jerry say those words is all I needed to run with this dream and to make sure that I give it my all and to see for it to all come together and for it to come true. So I wanted to honor Jerry for the mentorship that she provided me and also the confidence that she gave me. And it's really unfortunate because a lot of people don't know who Jerry Mock is. And again, she was the first woman who flew around the world back in a day where GPS didn't exist. So she had to use celestial navigation, naval charts to navigate around the world, which was really cool. From Columbus, I headed over to Montreal. In Montreal, we partnered with ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, where we hosted a huge outreach event with children to talk to them about STEM and aviation. What I'd like to do is kind of take you around the world with me. And I want to point out the stops where I had really big lessons learned that I'd like to pass along with you all and share kind of the scary moments during the around the world flight and the moments that were very exciting. You know, I feel like I can talk days about this trip because it was that impactful, that amazing. But within, 30 minutes or so, I'm going to try to give you all that happened in the course of 145 days. So bear with me. But these are the highlights. From Montreal, I jumped back into the plane and I flew to Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, which is indicated up there with that yellow star. So when I got to Halifax, I took a deep breath because I was getting ready. My next leg was to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. And any pilots in the room, just out of curiosity? Okay, wow, we have quite a couple of hands. So if you know anything about the North Atlantic Ocean, kind of the things to be aware of is that the temperature is extremely low, temperature in the ocean. It's extremely cold, the temperature is low, and one of the biggest concerns that sailors and pilots have is that if you were to impact that water, hypothermia will probably kill you within 2 seconds of impacting the water. That's how cold it is. And what pilots do to make sure that they have enough time, if they do have to ditch in the ocean, to bring out their survival equipment, is they wear an immersion suit. And that immersion suit, pilots call it a gummy suit. It's basically a very thick suit that it looks like a gummy bear that you zip up and that you wear. And having this suit gives you an extra maybe 8 minutes once the aircraft impacts, or if it impacts the water. So this was a big concern for me because I'm flying a single engine airplane. I only have one engine. So I had to think about the temperature of the water. Up in the North Atlantic, the weather changes extremely quickly. So it could go from a very sunny, pretty day, and within the course of 5 minutes, there could be thunderstorms and even snow. Some considerations that I had to take: my aircraft didn't have any de-icing equipment on board, so I couldn't fly into any known icing conditions. And with my plane, I was typically flying around the world, usually at 5,000 feet above the ground, or 7, sometimes 9,000 feet. If I ever flew above 9,000 feet, I would have to go on oxygen, simply because the oxygen, there's less oxygen above 10,000 feet. And because it was single pilot operations, I wanted to make sure I wasn't taking any chances, so I would go on oxygen. So with all of this in mind, I thought, okay, I have to get ready to cross the North Atlantic Ocean. I remember the morning that I woke up, I pre-flighted the aircraft. I made sure, I had my position reports ready to go. I had a log. I was getting my adrenaline was kicking in. I was getting ready for this crossing. And I thought, I need some inspiration to just get my morning started once the morning that I woke up to take off to fly across the Atlantic. And I thought of Amelia Earhart, and there's a quote that she shared that really helped me to get going, and that was, the best way to do it is just to do it. And I thought I had prepared for this moment for almost 5 years. I'd learned all that I could possibly learn about flying a single engine airplane around the world. And now all that needs to happen is for me to get into the plane and just to do it. So it was Amelia Earhart that helped me that morning to get off the ground and fly towards the ocean. This is how the North Atlantic looked like. This is actual video footage. And I was at about 7,000 feet when this was recorded. So do you guys hear that loud radio sound? So that was my HF radio. For pilots who fly across oceans or, again, remote parts of the world, they have to use a high-frequency HF radio to communicate with air traffic control. And all that you're really communicating is your position, so air traffic control can ensure that there's enough separation between you and other traffic around you. And by having an HF radio installed so that I can communicate with with ATC, there was an additional antenna that had to be installed on the aircraft. So you can kind of see it. So this is the pilot seat. This was me looking out to the left wing, and this antenna started from the side window out to the wingtip up to the tail. It was a 28-foot cable that sat like a triangle on the exterior of the aircraft. And it was because of this cable that I could communicate with ATC. So I'm flying into the ocean. I'm about 300 miles in. I'm doing my position reports. I'm set up. The sun's out. There's an overcast layer below me, but life is good. As I'm flying along, I start to notice that this antenna that's connected here on my side window starts to become loose. And before I could blink, all I see is this antenna shearing off of the aircraft, snapping. Half of the antenna hits my fuselage, the body of my plane. It just kind of whips against it. The other half snaps off, still connected to the wing, but the longer piece of this cable was dangling from the tail of the airplane. When this happened, my heart dropped. I remember looking down and I saw icebergs and I thought, my goodness, Titanic. And I had to stop myself and say, no, this is not a Titanic situation. Get a hold of yourself. Within the course of just a few seconds, I turned this plane around and I was flying back towards Canada to land. And the reason why I was so concerned is that this antenna, again, it's 28 feet long, it could wrap around my control surfaces, and God forbid it could interfere with the propeller, jamming the propeller, which again, that would result in an engine failure. So I knew I needed to get this plane on the ground ASAP, as soon as possible. The aircraft was completely radio silent for 2.5 hours as I sat there at 7,000 feet, trying not to look down at the icebergs and not being able to communicate with anybody. I eventually made my way towards a small island called St. Pierre. It's actually a French island. It's French territory. It's on the Canadian eastern side. I had a 6,000-foot runway. As you can see, the weather was great. I did the visual approach into St. Pierre. Air traffic control had a very thick French accent. And as I flew into this airport, I actually didn't know that it was a French airport. So eventually, I land. You can see the pictures. Once when I Googled St. Pierre after the trip was completed, I saw that there was a photographer at St. Pierre who took pictures and posted them online. He posted 4 pictures, and I only post 3 because the 4th one is a close-up of my face, and I just look so distraught that I thought, my God, I hope nobody ever has to see this picture. So I eventually landed. The air traffic controller said, okay, shut off the airport, shut off the engine once you get to the customs ramp, and there will be a customs agent there to greet you shortly. And I did just that. Once I shut off the engine, I jumped out of the plane to go see what had happened. And to my surprise, this cable was completely destroyed. As I'm standing there with this antenna in my hand, the customs agent comes up to me, and he's this tall guy with dark hair, very thick accent, comes up and says, bonjour, and he kind of looks around and he says, where's the pilot? Like, where's the pilot? And I'm kind of standing there with this antenna in my hand, and I'm like, what? What do you mean, where's the pilot? And he said, no, I'm a customs agent. This is important. Where's the pilot? So he didn't believe that I was the pilot of this plane. And then he asked me, does your parents know that you're out here flying over the ocean with antenna issues? And I said, of course they know. But the customs agent explained that this is not the ideal airport to be stuck in because it's a former military airport. It would be very difficult to find a mechanic that could assemble this antenna back together. And that my best option would be for me to fly to an airport called St. John's, Newfoundland, which is the northeastern tip of Canada. And I thought, my gosh, I just came from the North Atlantic with this incident with the antenna. I really don't want to get back into the plane. But I took a couple of deep breaths. I made sure the aircraft was good to go. The customs agent helped me take the antenna off, detached it from the plane, jumped back into the airplane, started the engine, and I flew to St. John's, Newfoundland. From there, I was grounded for almost 2 weeks. Eventually, what we had to do was have our mechanic come out from Las Vegas to reinstall the antenna. And you better believe I was there with our mechanic, making sure that this antenna was, if not glued and welded to the plane, that it was very close and well attached to the plane so that this wouldn't happen again. Eventually, the antenna was put back on 2 weeks later, and I was back on the road to cross the North Atlantic. And I have to say, the second time around, it was very uneventful. It was beautiful. This is a picture that I took while flying across the North Atlantic. And I have to say, for pilots, when you fly over water, there's a point that pilots are very concerned with, that they keep track of, and that's called the point of no return. And basically what this point means is that once you've crossed it, you don't have enough fuel to turn the plane back around and land at the airport that you departed from. So once you pass the point of no return, you're kind of committed fuel-wise to your destination. And I remember passing this point and looking out into the ocean, and I saw, blue water, blue skies, and it hit me that in the history of aviation, there's only been 8 women who've crossed this ocean solo in a single-engine airplane. And I would have never believed that the 8th woman would be this shy girl from Afghanistan who grew up not the brightest student in her class, extremely shy, grew up in Richmond, California with her 5 sisters. I just didn't believe that the 8th woman or the 9th woman in history would be this woman, and that woman was me. So it was this very euphoric moment that I had over the Atlantic Ocean, and I wish I could turn to somebody and say, like, can you believe this? But it was just me. I tried looking for whales in the ocean. I couldn't see any. I was looking for birds. I didn't even see birds. But the mid-Atlantic, it's just such a beautiful place, especially when you're that close to the water. I saw shades of blue that I had never seen before, and it was absolutely beautiful. I landed in an island called the Azores, Santa Maria. These are islands off of the coast of Portugal. And I rested, I refueled the aircraft, and I was back in the airplane headed towards Madrid. So I want to share something with you because, this kind of came to me as a surprise. When I was flying from Portugal to Spain, for some reason, I was expecting to find, by looking out the window, some sort of a barrier or border separating these 2 countries from one another. And I don't know why I was looking for that. But there I was, flying over Portugal, getting ready to get into Spain's airspace. And on my GPS, there was a big, magenta line separating these 2 countries. And on my map, too, there was a huge line that created a border between these 2 countries. And I kept looking out the window, trying to find something, a wall, something to separate these 2 countries. But guess what I saw? This is what I saw. Nothing. And it dawned on me at 9,000 feet, and again, I knew this, but I had a different perspective, that borders are man-made. They don't really exist in real life. They exist because somebody said, okay, this is when Portugal ends and this is where Spain begins. These man-made borders, unfortunately, are the reasons why children go uneducated, why people go hungry in some countries that have conflicts. It's these man-made borders, and in reality, these borders don't even exist. So this was a big lesson that I walked away. There I was, flying into Spain, and I'm just kind of shocked that there was really nothing out there. As a pilot who's flown around the world, I can tell you from above, the world looks very connected. It looks like it's all one piece of land. And again, it's man-made borders that make us think, we're so different, but we're really not. Once I got to Spain, rested, got back in the airplane, and I flew to an island called Calgary in Italy, which is indicated right here where the green dot is. From Calgary, I had the chance to see what the Mediterranean Sea looked like as I was flying in this region, and it was absolutely stunning. I kept thinking, I can't believe I'm here. I'm making my way towards Greece. I'm flying over the Mediterranean Sea. I couldn't believe the shades of blue and green that I was looking out at the window, and I thought, this is where people go to vacation. And here I am flying over it. I thought it was really neat. I landed in Athens, Greece, and typically when I would land at an airport, I was always a small plane at the airport. It was usually I would land in international airports because they had customs, and all of these big jets would just you could see the pilots' heads turning towards me. And oftentimes they kind of looked at me like I was lost, especially hearing a young woman's voice, on the radios for this aircraft. They were like, what's going on? Who is she? But there I was, just kind of taxiing along and really excited to have landed the aircraft and to be at my destination. During my stop in Greece, I had the opportunity for one of our outreach events, to go to a organization called The Smile of a Child. And the most unique thing about The Smile of a Child is that it's a shelter home for kids who either have been abandoned by their parents. If their parents can't take care of them, they drop them off at The Smile of a Child. So it's really a shelter home. Oftentimes, refugees do go to these homes for shelter. So it's a big shelter for kids, whether their parents are living or not. No questions asked. They go to this shelter, and they are educated, they are fed, and they have a bed to sleep in. So I had the opportunity to go to The Smile of a Child, and when I went there, there's a group of kids, I want to say about 12 of them. Some were from Africa, others were refugees from Syria. There were a couple of local young girls from Greece that were there. But there was one girl in particular who half of her face looked like it was burnt. She, as we were having the event, she kept coming in and out of the room. And every time she would exit the room, she would get into this hysterical cry. And it was just really odd. So as I'm talking to the students, I eventually stopped the talk, and I went to the teacher and I asked, hey, what's going on with this young girl? She keeps coming in and out of the room, and she's crying. And the teacher explained to me that her name is Sarah. Sarah came to The Smile of a Child about 2 weeks before my visit. And they don't know exactly where she came from or how she got there. All that they know is that she is originally from Afghanistan. And she keeps crying, and nobody knows how to speak Farsi to communicate with her or to ask her questions or to talk to her. And she, of course, didn't know how to speak any Greek. So when I heard that, my heart just kind of sunk, and I thought, my God, I'm from Afghanistan. And I quickly went up to her, and I started to speak to her. And after a few minutes, Sarah explained to me that just a few weeks before I had arrived, and before she arrived to The Smile of a Child, she remembers being in Iran with her mom. And her mom one morning said, Sarah, put your shoes on, we're going to the park. And they went to the park, and the last thing her mother said is, her mother gave her a hug and said, go with this man, he's going to take you somewhere safe, but I will never see you again. And so Sarah went with this guy, and she said, that's the last thing that I remember, and next thing I know, I'm here. I don't know where my mom is. I feel like she abandoned me, and I don't know anybody here. Again, this is an 8-year-old child, and it was one of those moments where I thought, I'm flying around the world meeting all of these incredible people, but I'm here for this purpose, to give some relief to Sarah. So I explained to Sarah that her mother did not abandon her, that her mom was very brave to, her mom basically sacrificed spending every day with Sarah so that she could go to Greece and live a better life than what she would have in Iran. So my stop in Greece, I had several outreach events, but that was the most memorable one because I felt like I was there at that time while she was there to provide that relief for her, an explanation as to what was going on. So that was really cool. I did go back to Greece. I did meet up with Sarah again. She's having surgery to have her face, half of her face was burnt, and so she's having cosmetic surgery to have that fixed, which is really exciting. She can speak way better Greek than I can, so all is well in Athens with The Smile of a Child and with Sarah. So from Greece, I jumped back into the airplane and I started to head down towards Africa. I landed in Egypt, and Egypt was my only stop in the continent of Africa, and part of that was because the type of fuel that my aircraft utilizes, avgas, is not available in a lot of countries in Africa. So I was really kind of restricted to Cairo. I remember as a young girl, I'd read about the pyramids, and I thought, why am I reading about the pyramids? I'm never going to go there. And this was when I was in middle school, and I remember walking up to the pyramids and me remembering that I said that. And I thought, never say never. And I could just feel this big smile on my face. It was really the middle school girl in me that was smiling and couldn't believe that. This is something I read so many years ago, and I thought, I'm never going to visit the pyramids, and there I was standing in front of it. So that was really neat. And what really fascinated me about the pyramids is that, you know, STEM, it's something that's used a lot nowadays as if it's new, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But I looked at the pyramids and I realized that every component of STEM was used to build these pyramids way back then. And it's something that has always been with us throughout history. And it's really, our future is headed into the STEM field. So this is really the time to be, especially if you're a young boy or girl, to be pursuing careers in STEM. Although it's been with us throughout history, as we evolve in our society, in our future, that's where our world is going, is into the STEM fields. From Egypt, I flew the entire country of Saudi Arabia at 9,000 feet, and I had never seen the desert before, and this is what it was. It was lots of sand. It was about a 9.5-hour flight. There was a sandstorm that took place when I was about 2 hours into Saudi Arabia, which I experienced the worst turbulence you could ever imagine. The airline's turbulence was nothing compared to the turbulence that I had experienced over Saudi Arabia. But that was really neat to fly over it. From Egypt, I flew over Saudi Arabia. I landed in Bahrain. In Bahrain, it was a quick turnaround. I only stayed there overnight, got back in the fuel, jumped in the plane to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. While in the UAE, the aircraft was down for maintenance, and what I did is I jumped into a commercial airplane and I went to Afghanistan. And going back to Afghanistan was really quite the experience. I remember, so my dad, he lives in Afghanistan, and he picked me up at the airport, and I just remember you know, seeing a big crowd as we were making our way into the airport, and I was like, Dad, who are all these people? What are they doing? What's going on? And he said, all of these, especially lots of young girls, they have all been here for the past couple of hours in anticipation to greet you and to welcome you back to Kabul. And it was just, you know, meeting these girls, talking to them about aviation, it was just a very unique experience for me. You know, they were looking at me very inspired, thinking, how are you so brave to get into an airplane and fly it around the world? But I was looking at them thinking, how are you girls so brave to live in these conditions year after year? So they were looking to me and they were very inspired, yet I was looking to them just as inspired. So that was really, again, a very cool experience. I did have the chance to meet with the president of Afghanistan, President Ashraf Ghani. The gentleman with the big tummy here, that's actually my dad. But when I met President Ashraf Ghani, the first thing I asked him was, what are you doing to bring STEM and aviation to girls in this country? And he said, well, we all need to work together to make this a reality so that girls can fly and that girls can get into robotics and into the STEM careers. So I'm working on a couple of projects right now, and I've gotten a lot of support from the Afghani government, and it's just the constant, you know, you just don't give up. You keep working towards those plans. And every effort that I make, you know, although it's not a big effort, eventually, you know, you try so many times, something will come up. So that was my stop in Afghanistan. After a 2.5-day trip, I went back to Dubai. Maintenance was done, the plane checked out, got back in the plane, and I was headed towards India. You know, this picture is really funny because in India, how they greet you is they say namaste. And when I met this customs agent, I said namaste to her, and at the same time, as my hand was in the prayer position, I thought, God help me, because I just reached the monsoon season in India, and what that means is lots of rain, low visibility, thunderstorms, and it was going to be a challenge for me to fly in this region of the world because of the monsoon weather. So the weather report said it was a sunny, beautiful day. I go outside, and this is what it looked like. This is monsoon weather for you. And I thought, oh yeah, no, definitely not taking off. I was in India for a couple of days. We did a few outreach events. I waited for the storm to pass. And from there, I had the plans of flying across India, but what I ended up doing was flying around it to Sri Lanka, over to Thailand, Phuket, down to Singapore, and then Indonesia. And again, it was monsoon season, so lots of dodging thunderstorms, going on oxygen because I was going up at altitude. And this is sometimes what I would see is just a little opening of blue sky with nothing but storms surrounding you, and you're like, my God, if my plane could just go so much faster to make it through that little pocket of blue. I did cross the equator to go down to Australia, and this is what the equator looks like. Lots of clouds. But that was the equator, which I kind of didn't know what to expect. But it's just water and lots of thunderstorms. When I got to Australia, this was my route up to Hawaii. I had 2 stops in Australia. I went from Darwin to, I would pronounce it Cairns, but they say Cairns, Australia. And it was pretty much a lot of desert throughout Darwin and to Cairns. And basically, Darwin's up here, and this is Cairns. So that was lots of desert, some water. From there, I went to New Caledonia, another French island. And all of the pilots, the customs agent had heard about me at that point of the flight, and they actually believed that I was the pilot of the airplane. So that was good news. From New Caledonia, I flew up to Fiji. From Fiji, I went up to American Samoa. And again, it was lots of rain. I was grounded for a couple of days in American Samoa because of the weather. But American Samoa is a part of the United States. So you can imagine when I went to the grocery store and I saw Rice Krispie treats and, American type food, I was in heaven. I just went, I bought a lot of groceries, and the clerk was like, oh, you're feeding, you must be having a party, you're feeding a lot of people. And I was like, no, I'm taking all of this to the hotel room, and I'm just gonna pig out. So I ate so much that day, but I had snacks for me until I got to Hawaii. Right before I got to Hawaii, I landed in a small island called Kiribati, a small island called Christmas Island in Kiribati. And there's always a huge gap with women in aviation, and I thought this was so cool because the only other pilot that I met on this island was a woman, and it was incredible that all of the pilots on this island were women. I mean, yes, it was just 2 of us, but I thought that was pretty neat. I got to Hawaii. I was looking at the longest leg of the trip, 14 and a half hours. Again, 14 and a half hours of being in that one seat, not getting up, being really, just kind of listening to music, calculating my fuel, and eating snacks, and making sure that I was ready mentally if I had an engine failure. And this was the route. It was about 21,000 nautical miles from Honolulu, Hawaii, up to Hayward, California. I remember I looked at the plane. I made sure everything was good to go. I checked every nut and bolt, and I was like, all right, this plane hasn't failed me yet. We've got this. And I did take off to cross the Pacific Ocean, and crossing the Pacific Ocean was much more enjoyable versus the North Atlantic, simply because I knew that the temperatures of the water were much lower, the weather is predictable, And again, the Pacific region is just so beautiful. So to fly and witness the Pacific Ocean that close off of the water was extremely amazing. I landed in Hayward, California about 2 in the morning. The airport was closed. My brother-in-law took this picture, so he has all of these emojis and stuff. But I landed in Hayward, and there were no photographers. There's nobody there. Not that there are photographers usually, but he just took this picture on his phone, and it's the only picture that I have of my landing. And I thought it was pretty cool, and I wanted to share it with you all. But Richmond, California is very close to Hayward. It's about 30 minutes driving distance away from one another, the two cities. So I had the chance to go and spend some time with my family and to talk to them about the trip that far. And that was a really good reset for me to get back into the plane and fly back to Florida to complete the around the world flight. When I did make it back to Daytona Beach, Florida, I kissed the ground. I was so happy. I was like, land, I'm done, I'm back. It was safe. And it was a really special day. On October 3rd, it will mark the 1-year anniversary of the completion of the global flight. In total, I visited 22 different countries. There were 30 stops. We hosted 32 outreach events. I got to meet with 3,000 kids face-to-face to talk to them about the careers in STEM and aviation. And upon completing the trip around the world, I became the youngest woman to fly a single-engine aircraft around the world. I couldn't have done this without our Dreams Soar team. Again, all volunteers. And we were able to have such a global impact around the world because of our team coming together and working around the clock on this mission. And of course, our partners. These were just some of the folks who chipped in and helped to make this entire trip around the world possible. Some of it was financial donations, other were in kind. And because fuel was so expensive, there were some companies who literally donated fuel, which was great. It was a big cost saver. So I talked a lot about the global flight around the world and my experiences, but the whole reason for this trip was to inspire the next generation. So I want to show you a quick minute video that gives you perspective to what the outreach component of this global flight around the world looked like.
Young woman here who's reaching new heights and inspiring people along the way.
So come May, early spring of next year, I'm going to be flying this Bonanza around the world.
Meet Shaesta Waiz, founder and president of Dreams Soar. She's here at base to share her inspirational story of going from a refugee camp to being the first female civilian pilot from Afghanistan.
All right, does anyone have any questions? Thank you. Okay, I believe someone's coming around with a microphone. I could be wrong. Or if not, we'll just take questions. Okay, yes.
how many women have accomplished what you did, and how old were you when you landed?
Good question. So only 7 women have flown around the world solo in a single engine airplane. There have been women who've done it with other people in the aircraft, but solo is the key category. And when I finished the around the world flight, I started when I was 29 years old and I finished it when I was 30. The woman before me who held the record was 32 years old. So if there's any young girls in the crowd that are ambitious enough to break my record, come talk to me. Okay, question over here.
What kind of search and rescue did you have in place if things went down, say between Hawaii and California?
Good question. What type of search and rescue is in place? You know, I had my life raft. That was it. Now, the Coast Guard's available, of course, but depending on where I would be in the event of a crash, they may be able to get to me or not. But I had my life raft, so that was my plan. Question back there, yes. Good question. Where is the Bonanza now? So I formed a really big bond with this aircraft. It really meant a lot. But when I got back from the around the world flight, our nonprofit was leasing this plane. We didn't actually own it. So when we got back and the trip was done, it was either we invest our monthly rent into scholarships for young girls to empower them, or we pay the rent for this airplane. So it was a tough decision, but we thought, you know, our mission is not to own an airplane. Our mission is to empower the next generation. So the airplane is back with the owner, and we are building a scholarship fund so that we can give out meaningful scholarships to girls to pursue flight and careers in STEM. That was a tough decision, but it was important. Question over here.
What do you have to do?
So what do you do when you have to use the bathroom or if you're feeling sick? The bathroom one is an interesting one because I couldn't get up again. There's something called a travel john that I used. I'm very happy that I didn't have anyone else in the airplane because that would have been very unfortunate for both of us. But you know, being solo was great, but I used something called a travel john that people can use when they're hiking or camping in places where there aren't any bathrooms. There's absolutely no number 2s going on in the plane, so you just have to save it or hold it. I know, that's great. That's horrible. I'm sorry. But if I got sick, I really would just have to suck it up in the sense that I would be very careful to make sure that I wouldn't eat food that would upset my stomach. Especially 2 days before my takeoff, I was just eating, you know, crackers and apples and stuff. But I thanked myself for it during the flight. Yeah, it's very difficult to land in an airport that you don't have clearance for. Of course, if there is an emergency, you can land. But I knew I just had to be very careful and avoid landing in airports that I didn't have clearance for. Question here.
What was the reason that you didn't fly your own plane to Afghanistan?
Good question. What was the reason why I didn't fly my own plane to Afghanistan? So when our insurance provider saw the route and Afghanistan included in it, they said, no way. There's no way you're going to fly yourself to Kabul because planes are still being shot at, especially military airplanes, but it's not very safe. But in addition for it not being safe as far as getting shot at, the elevation in Afghanistan and Kabul is very high, the airport elevation, and it's surrounded by mountains. And for my plane, now for a jet, it's very easy for them to fly in. I mean, they don't have to worry about altitudes. They're typically pressurized. My plane, you know, every altitude, the performance drops the higher that you go. So I thought, I don't have great performance, and planes are being shot at, so it's probably, I can sympathize why the insurance people are saying no. And so rather than saying, okay, I can't go, I thought, I'm not going to let a plane hold me back. I'm going to get myself there one way or another. And it worked out because the aircraft needed to undergo maintenance. So I got into a plane and I just kind of went to Afghanistan for a couple days and came back. So that worked out. And then the insurance people were still not happy, but question over here, and we'll go to the back. So what is my next dream? That's a great question. So Dreams Soar is working very heavily on the scholarship component and figuring out what would be the next big meaningful step to continue our efforts in inspiring the next generation. What I've been doing this past year is I've visited we've partnered with 22 different organizations in 8 different countries, and I've just been going out to schools and talking to kids about this incredible journey and what, if you believe in your dreams and you go after it and you work hard, what can come of that. But for me personally, I had a really strong connection in Afghanistan, and seeing those girls and the conditions that they're living in, it really inspired me. And I thought, I need to come back and I need to do something for these girls so that they don't feel like the world has forgotten about them. I most certainly won't. And so initially I wanted to build a school in Afghanistan, which that is the ultimate goal, a STEM school for girls. But that is a very big undertaking, so I'm starting small. And my plan is there are a lot of girls that are interested in flying, and so I thought the next big step would be to get a airplane kit donated for girls to build an airplane with their own bare hands, a plane that will fly once it's done and once it goes through maintenance and deemed airworthy. So I'm working on this project for girls to get into aviation by building an airplane that eventually will fly in their skies. So it's all about getting kids involved and making them feel like they're a part of something, to give them that confidence, to give them knowledge and being able to work on something that will fly. I feel like for a kid, that's the ultimate experience. So that's kind of what's next. Okay, question. Do we have time?
Maybe 2 more.
Okay, 2 more. So I see with the shiny sequins shirt. Yeah, the blue shirt. Yeah, go ahead. So was I scared when I flew over the turbulence of Saudi Arabia? Yes, very scared. The truth is that there were a lot of scary moments, and every time those scary moments happened, I thought, what am I doing? Why am I not at home watching Netflix? Why am I here in this situation? But I have to say, every time I felt scared, and eventually I overcame it, I flew it, I landed safely, I thought, wow, what an experience. And for an aviator, to have the chance to see the world, I mean, that's like the ultimate dream of most pilots. So I enjoyed every single part of it, even the scary parts. But I'm not a machine. Yes, I absolutely did feel scared. I was homesick for so many days. And I just missed being like a normal person that could get into a car and drive to Starbucks. Like, Starbucks does not exist out in some of the countries that I visited. So, but other great things exist in those countries, so it was a new experience. Last question, right here, we'll take this one, yes? In what ways did it change my life or change my perspective? That's a good question. It's in many ways, who can say that they flew around the world? I mean, even when I say it sometimes, I'm like, did I really do that? And then I think about all the experience and I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely did that. But flying around the world, I've realized that the human being, regardless of where they are from or their backgrounds or their challenges, they can accomplish anything. If you give them the right resources, if you give them a mentor that will empower them rather than disable them, they can accomplish anything. And when I tell you, I wish you all had a chance to see me when I was 7 years old. I was a completely different person. And having flown around the world, I just realized how much we're able to do if we just put down our guard and if we just believe in ourselves. One thing I struggled with my whole life as a woman was confidence, especially being in a very male-dominated industry. Every time I made a decision, there was another pilot saying, I don't know if that was a great decision, but you have to kind of make mistakes and just grow as a person. So what I learned is that two big things, I promise it will be quick, is that the human being can accomplish anything. And the second thing is that the girls that I met in Greece were the same girls that I met in Afghanistan, who were then the same girls I met in Indonesia. And what I mean by that is that kids are kids, no matter what part of the world they are from. And I was so surprised to see how much human beings are alike. You know, yes, they're from different parts of the world, but at the end of the day, we're all human. We're all of the human kind. And overall, my experience with people around the world was just incredible. So, thank you.
Wow. What a privilege to have been able to hear from you tonight, Shaesta. A couple points that come to mind. So you mentioned Jerry Mock and the Cessna 180 that she did her round-the-world flight in. And it actually is hanging from the ceiling out at the Stephen Udvar-Hazy Center, but will become a signature piece, one of the artifacts, in a We All Fly gallery that we'll be building out as part of this program I previously mentioned. Now, if that airplane's going to come down here to be in that gallery, it sounds to me like we're going to have an empty spot at Hazy. So whoever has that bonanza, you know, I'd love to talk to them because it's certainly worthy of it's a national story and it's a great one to share. So thank you for that. Again, I want to thank Amelia Butler and friends at General Electric for giving us this opportunity and hosting this lecture series. As mentioned, it's one of many, and the next lecture hosted by GE that will be here in this auditorium is on October 10th, and we'll deal with, we'll be exploring the surprising use of drones, from entertaining drone shows like what we saw in the Olympics to tracking poachers in the African savannas. Again, it's free, and hopefully the weather will cooperate, and bear in mind that that we are here, but we have a much larger audience online watching and partaking in this through our website. So again, thank you to GE. Shaesta, thank you for being such a remarkable role model for not just young women, but for all of us. And thank you all for coming this evening. If you would, exit through the doors to the rear. Have a safe evening, and thank you so much for joining us.